Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source. A place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something on the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know would like to come on the show and have a chat, feel free to reach out to me on whatever social media platform you're on. I'm probably there. And the best way to find out which ones I am on is go to isaac.r11.com and you'll see a list of all the places where you can find me. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get started. This person is, works in a space that I've always been curious about. I've always had a trepidation about, and hopefully we can learn some cool things about the auth industry. So, today my guest is Brian Pontarelli. Brian, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, Brian Pontarelli, founder of a company called FusionAuth, and I've been doing tech for a very, very long time, 35 years or so now, maybe more, 39 years maybe. So yeah.
Well, I mean, that's hopefully you learned something in that amount of time. So, I mean, you don't
I've learned
look like somebody that's been in tech for a long time. I mean, maybe that's, we were talking beforehand, for the folks that are listening and watching, we were talking about golf. Maybe it's all the golf you play, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're out
exactly.
you're out in the sun, you got a nice tan, you don't look like somebody that's been doing this for a while. But with that, I'd like to kind of know how it got started for you. Like, when did you realize that technology was the thing for you? Were you younger, or were you kind of mid-career? Like, when did that happen for you?
I was right about 10,
Okay.
and my school had purchased a couple of Apple IIe computers, and my parents were purchasing an IBM 8086. And so at school, I got to go tinker around with these computers, got to come home, tinker around with our home computer, and it just started sort of clicking, right? I started to figure out how computers worked. I started programming at a pretty early age. I was doing, basic, and I started to learn C and Pascal and those sort of things pretty early on. So when I say I've been coding for 39 years, that's because I started when I was
Sure.
essentially
That's
10.
fair. That's
You
fair.
know?
That's fair. That's, I mean, still, it's, I mean, uh, you know, doesn't matter where you are in your life. Like, when you've built an app, you built an app, right? You're a developer. Do you remember like the first thing that you actually built? Like, was it some trivial thing? Did you build something that was, a lot of people like they got interested into tech because of like playing games, and they like their first thing was like, a game sort of thing. Like, what do you remember the first thing that you actually built?
So it was really just a simple like hello world, and then I added a counter on the end and made it stop
Yeah.
after 100 iterations. Those kind of things were like the first thing. I'm like, oh, there's for loops. I get that, and
Yeah.
and then they stop after they get to a count. I can print to the command line, those kind of things. But the first thing that I built that was like actually featureful, I guess you could say,
Sure.
was I started working on a game, just a text-based game, and it would just ask you questions, and as long as you gave it an answer that it understood, it would branch to sort of the next question,
Sure.
right? And so it was very branch based. It was just like, ask question, keep getting an answer until you get this answer, then go to the next question, and those kind of, it's very if statement based. And so that was kind of the first thing that I did that I think was like not just hello world.
Yeah. Was that like same time frame? Were you kind of like in your, late childhood, early teens, sort of? Yeah, yeah, give or take.
Yeah, exactly. 12 maybe. Yeah.
So with that, like, did you? I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I wonder for you, like, was there ever like a thought in your head of like, I don't want to work with computers in my life? Or was that like always like the thing? And even if you asked yourself like retrospectively, you're like, I don't even know what I've gone into. I wouldn't have been an accountant, or I wouldn't have been, in construction or whatever. Like, tech was the thing for me.
Yeah, there's a couple of times where I was like, maybe be a doctor. My dad was a dentist. My mom was an RN. Maybe a lawyer. Like I kind of tinkered with ideas of like doing something different. Even like to just taking over my dad's dental practice. Like he's like, oh, you want to take over my dental practice when you get? And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I tinkered, and then actually when I started college, I had been programming and doing that for so long. I was like, well, maybe I'll try something new. And so I actually went into electrical engineering
Okay.
first, and realized that that was not my cup of tea.
Sure.
And I switched majors when I was a junior back to CS. So
Okay. Yeah, what was it about the electrical engineering? Was it just all of the like the math that's involved, or was it like was it in
Math.
particular, or you just weren't super interested in like breadboards and all that sort of stuff?
I mean, the breadboards were kind of fun and like kind of piecing things together was kind of cool. But yeah, the math and just like having to like sit down with, a diagram and figure out voltages over things or like what phase it was in or like how fast it would discharge. Like it just was so boring to me. And I was like,
Sure.
well, I just want to go code, like this
Yeah.
is, when do I get to the coding part of this, So I realized that the code was what I really wanted to do, which is why, I like the digital classes, right? Because they were still kind of in the double E
Yeah.
space. And when I got to digital, I'm like, oh, cool, I get to program 8086s. This is really awesome. I'll
Yeah.
learn assembly language and all those things. And so I really like those classes, but it was the lack of coding and all the circuits classes that I was just like, this is not my cup of tea. So,
Yeah, so with that, like, did you kind of pick up on the like the IoT phase of tech, from 10 to 5 years ago? Like everybody had a Raspberry Pi, everybody had an Arduino, everybody's trying to figure out like what silly projects around their house they could do with that. Did you get into that or did you kind of avoid it?
I skipped it, but I bought a lot of my friends and even my brother. I was like, I bought people Raspberry Pis, and I'm like, oh, look, cool. You can like, put Linux on this and like totally tinker with things and like install things and hook up sensors to it. I'm like, go, 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 go. Well, I'm over here like desperately trying to keep a company alive and like
Sure.
make it to the next stage, right? So yeah, I mean, I missed it unfortunately because I was so heads down
Yeah.
on building a company.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty it's funny that I've talked to a lot of people that have kind of like that EE or even like another engineering discipline, and there is a bit of a trend where it's like I just kind of really liked I would take these software classes and then I like the software classes more than like the more general classes for the curriculum. Which I think is funny because I think a lot of us are like, oh, engineering, whether it's civil, electrical, plastics, whatever, right? It's like, oh, like I can get a good job as an engineer, and you can actually see it. Like you can see a bridge, you can see electrical configurations, like wiring, but like software is a bit different, right? You have to go out and like find software, right? I mean, nowadays it's everywhere because we're touching it all the time, but like you actually have to think about it. Like you go to the grocery store and you see the thing and it's like, oh, there's probably 10 to 20, 30 people that are working on making this like POS system at a grocery store work, and that's those sort of things. I think technology for a lot of us is kind of obfuscated by the real world, whereas more practical engineering isn't.
I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, like the tactile world and the things that you see, even the hardware itself, right? Like the,
Yeah.
the cases and the displays and the hard drives and all these things come together to make the thing that we're able to put software onto. But yeah, I mean, 90% of the software, maybe not quite that much, but a lot of it you don't see, right? It sits on a server and it runs and it takes inputs, it produces outputs, and it's what powers the front ends, but it is the thing that makes all of the software that we use work.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people just have no clue what goes into backends unless you're an engineer.
Yeah. So you went to like I imagine you got like a computer science or information systems type of degree. Um, when did you realize that like there's good money in tech?
So I came out of my degree right around 99. And so that
Oh,
was sort of the dot com.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
We're going up dot com. It's getting big. And then 2 years later or so, it crashed, right?
yeah.
So the dot bomb happened. So during school, I actually kicked around a bunch of ideas with other people. I'm like, hey, why don't we go do a startup and let's do this? Everybody's getting their startup to like, work and getting money or, having success. And so a couple of us actually built a company in college and tried to make it work. It did not. But we knew that there was money there because everybody was coming out of school and making, good money as a software engineer. And it didn't, the crash took that away a little bit for a couple of years, but then it immediately ticked right back
Yeah.
up in like, '04
Yeah.
or '03, '04. So yeah, it was during college that I
Yeah.
really saw that there was money in it.
Yeah, I mean, the dot com, I guess, bubble or whatever you want to call it, is pretty fascinating because to your point, it wasn't really like a crash. It was kind of like a reset, because I think that the internet introduced so many possibilities that all these companies tried to get into that space and they weren't really prepared for it. And then all of a sudden, the industry kind of caught up. And I mean, what is it like 2004, like Facebook is created, Google is right in the throes of it, YouTube is starting to get really, really popular. So it's like you said, there's like a 2-year gap where it's like, oh, tech wasn't the biggest thing on the planet, and then that changed very, very quickly back again.
That's right. Yeah, and then it just
Yeah,
it hockey sticked, right? It just went,
yeah,
it went gangbusters. So
yeah, and now we're here today, where it's like every direction you look, there's technology touching something, right?
yeah.
Um, so you tried to do the startup thing in college and that didn't really work. But when you got into like the real, like when you're real, I apologize. I didn't mean real. When you got into building things, like working at a company, like what were some of the things that you were working on that you actually really got in, like enjoyed doing or got interested from?
So when I was at Orbitz, which is sort of like 2002 to 2007, that sort of time frame, I learned how to build distributed computing,
Hmm.
right? And it wasn't really a thing back then. It was
Sure.
sort of just coming around. There's an old technology called
Yeah.
RMI. There were these really old technologies that were allowing us to communicate between computers, like physical hardware that's using the network to communicate with each other, and so that style of computing was very new. Like service-oriented architectures was like just coming out at the tail end of sort of when I was at Orbitz. But at Orbitz, we used a technology called Genie, which almost no one's ever heard of. Even fewer people have even used. But what it did is it allowed you to discover systems on a network that you could communicate with.
Sure.
And it was a precursor to sort of like RESTful endpoints that told you about other RESTful endpoints, right? So it's like you would have an endpoint, you basically like go query it, and you'd be like, hey, where are all the other servers I can talk to?
Sure.
And what we would allow you to do is you'd basically bring up a server, it would register itself with the registry, and then it would say like, oh, by the way, I talk these APIs. And those APIs then would get called from other places, right? So it was actually a really cool technology. And it was high performance. I mean, we were serving, millions of airline tickets a day. We were doing like, hundreds of millions of airline searches, for flights and hotels and all these other things a day. And so that style of computing was new. And I got to learn a ton because there weren't a lot of other places you could go to do that level of, engineering.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you could go to Google, it was barely, just coming out, it's barely starting. Amazon wasn't even really a thing yet. There were a few other travel sites that were kind of doing that, but there was like Yahoo was sort of around. Banks did sort of that level, but not really. But Orbitz was like, yeah, we're gonna like own the entire market of like airline tickets, and that there's a ton of them.
Yeah.
So it was really cool to work on that scale of a project.
Yeah, it's funny because you're talking about all these things, and in my head, I mean, like, oh, so Kubernetes. It's like it's just
didn't exist.
I know exactly, but like it's funny. I've had this conversation with enough people where, they worked on some system or they built some tool and they describe it, and I'm like, oh, so you built Kubernetes, or you worked on the version of Kubernetes that before Kubernetes. This should be
That's right.
Yeah, the distributed computing thing is pretty interesting, especially like at the dawn of like I guess what you would call like modern web, because a lot of the ideas didn't really exist, where it's like, oh, what do you mean like service discovery, or oh, what do you mean like I need to know what all the different machines in this network are doing, and where these APIs are. It's pretty fascinating. I guess one of my questions around that is, what fascinated you about it? Was it just like you saw that there was a future in like, oh, there's all these different like apps, and it's like they're not really apps, they're part of a larger solution, and figuring out ways for them to be effective with each other? Was that something that was interesting you? Like the problem solving aspect of it? Was the technical piece that really interested you? Like what fascinates you about this space particularly?
It was the scale, right? Because like back then, buying like 6 gigs of RAM was
A lot of money.
insane.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah,
money.
it was a lot of money, and like having like a a dual core CPU, whew, that was like, 1 gigahertz. I was like, wow, this thing is so fast, right? And so what you could do on a single computer, even if you spent like tens of thousands of dollars on a really large piece of hardware, was limited. And so in order to scale operations, that required a lot of CPU, RAM, disk, whatever it might be. You had to, make it horizontal.
Yeah.
And so we had systems that were like hundreds or thousands of nodes, and they were all intercommunicating, right? They were talking to each other, and like they would distribute work and divide it up. Same way Google does across their search index, right? They can't fit a search index in a single computer, nor can they search across it.
Sure.
So they have this distribution process where it goes out to all these servers, collects all the results, and like aggregates them into a single search result page, right? And so we were doing very similar things with hotel searches and airline searches and purchasing. And so it was just a really cool problem because of the scale, right? And there, again, not a ton of companies back then were doing that scale. And so we were solving problems that like no one else had really solved before. And so you have to invent a lot of your own technologies, right?
Yeah.
Like we had a database connection pool that we had pulled in from some open source project, and it could not scale to what we needed, right? And so we wrote our own because we needed it to go faster than all the open source projects out there. And so that was like, you're writing code that like nobody gets to write now because these are all now solved problems.
Yeah. I mean, like I remember like the Orbitz of the world, and like when Expedia first came out, and Travelocity, and like all these different tools, right? And the first thing that I remember thinking is like, how do they get permission to do this? Like, how are they able to basically crawl or scrape like airline information and then like basically act as some intermediary? And like it's just fascinating. Like, and you see this a lot in like a lot of industries where it's like there's like a middle person whose like responsibilities is to like kind of like, to your point, like aggregate a bunch of information and then just make it available in like one single pane of glass, right? But like I've always thought like, oh, it just seems very, very odd to me that big airline would be okay with somebody purchasing a ticket like not directly through them, which I mean, but I guess it's all money at the end of the day.
Yeah, they don't care as long as they sell just as many airline tickets or more than they were selling previously.
Yeah.
And usually it's like way more.
Oh, sure.
Right? So,
well, it's about accessibility. Right? That's the big thing, right? Like, it's funny because, I travel a good amount for work, and, I hardly ever like go directly to an airline page, just because it's like there's other tools that kind of make my life, a bit easier. And I don't really, and for what's worth, I don't really like a lot of the layouts of like the big airline pages, but that's beside the point. But I think what's fascinating too about kind of your stories that like you're looking at problems and you're immediately thinking of like solutions that I think today are kind of, I guess you would call them like modern, right? Or cloud, like I think the term that people use a lot is like cloud native, right? Have you, and like as you went on through your career, did you kind of always stay tuned into that space of like looking for technology trends that you could look to adopt, or companies that you're looking to start? It's like, oh, there's like a gap in this particular segment, like let's see if we can do something there.
Not really. So when I kind of jumped from Orbitz over to like an app dev shop, and we were building fairly small app for people.
Sure.
And so that was fun because you just got like exposure to a ton of different things, but they were all kind of dinky, I guess is a good term. Because like you're not
lots of forms over data, right?
Yeah, exactly. Forms and just like just very simple web apps, and so that was fine, right? Paid the bills, but like it was right after that I decided to go build something on my own, right? Because I saw an industry need, I saw a way to do it at scale. And high performance, and sort of apply all those things I learned at Orbitz to this problem. And the problem is very simple. It's like profanity filtering.
Oh, okay.
And so I sat down, wrote a profanity filter. It was basically better than anything else out there. It was real time, so you could use it in like game chat. So like in real time, you'd send a message, it would scan it before it was sent out to everyone else. And so I built that tool using a lot of the things that I learned from Orbitz, in terms of, just high performance, distributed computing, like being able to like do things horizontally and scale. And so we still are, that product still exists, and it's used by a lot of the major gaming companies, right?
Yeah.
So we have billions and billions of messages that flow through that every month. I would say hundreds of billions probably. So
Yeah, that's incredibly fascinating because I think of we were talking a little bit earlier about like things that like they're just a part of the ride now. Like you were talking about some of these trends that are just kind of built into systems now. And I think when you think about the fact that everybody's online now, there's all sorts of different ways to communicate online. You just assume that like all these systems have like they're like, oh, by default they're gonna make sure that like profanity, hate speech, like things that are not okay, whatever code of conduct, right? That they're just built in. Like it wouldn't even think like I imagine that when at the time you're doing this, I don't know the exact time frame, but you probably saw like a lot of like there's no moderation at all in some of these places, which is not good.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why I built it,
Yeah.
right? It's because like I'm like, I need a profanity filtering moderation tool for this thing I'm building over here. Couldn't find anything. And I was like, oh, I bet you there's a bunch of other people that need this too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go build this.
Yeah, it's funny because I immediately thought back to just to date myself, like I graduated like high school in like the mid 2000s. And like at the time, like ICQ and like AOL Instant Messenger were like the ways to talk to people. And I was thinking about this, like, man, there was no content moderation on those things. Like those chat rooms were just like just dump the worst of humanity at the time. Humanity has got like, depending on what your opinion is, humanity's gotten either better or worse since then. Like straight into that and just 12, 13-year-old kids just rocking, which I thought was so fascinating. Yeah, content moderation. And so that company is still around.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy to think. And how do you, and this is maybe just more of a generalist, like I built a thing and now a lot of people use it, sort of like at what point in time, because you mentioned you wrote like the original filter, obviously it's much more than that now. At what point in time do you really recognize like this isn't a Brian problem, this is a everybody problem?
That's a good question. I think once you sort of get your first large customer, somebody who's like,
Sure.
everybody would know, like a household name,
Yeah.
right? So for us, it was Pokemon. And we're like, oh, Pokemon uses our tool to like filter
that's
everything
cool.
they do.
My kid will think you're a hero.
Really cool.
Yeah.
And like Nintendo, right? And so like once you get these big names, you're like, oh my God, this is like, not only this is like an everyone problem, this is a massive businesses have this problem and they will pay you money to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And that's cool. That's really cool. So.
Yeah, I mean, and also with that, like I think, and I've talked to a few people that have started things that have gotten pretty big. And what I've noticed too is like there is this, and I don't know if it's just the founder's dilemma or whatever it is, but it's like these things are kind of your children, right? Like you incubate the idea, maybe you build the first prototype and you see it through, like to your point, like its first like big moment in the world. So at what point in time do you recognize it no longer is your child anymore or no longer is a part of like your inner workings?
I think it always is. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I think some people, they sell it off and they just walk away.
Sure.
And I think they walk away, but part of them is still like, they check in on it, constantly. And they're like, how's it going? Like, what's happening? Especially if they still own like a piece of it. Right.
Yeah.
But it's really hard. I even with Orbitz, like I built some of the underlying architecture for the whole system, and I would check in, and until they had finally rewritten it, which happens.
Sure.
It took like 7 years or so after I left.
There's not very much software out there that like has been around for 40 years untouched, right? Sorry to interrupt you, but keep going.
No, that's okay. Yeah, exactly. And so like everybody I knew that was still there, I was like, hey, is that thing still there? And they're like, no, we finally yanked it.
Oh, wow.
Cool. And then I can let it go because
the last little bit of you is gone, right? Like there's no longer like my connective tissue is no longer there. Like I was reading an article years ago about like, and this isn't to knock them, but like how SAP has like this core piece of their code that was written like 40 years ago that like literally one person at the company at a time has access to because it is so important to the essential core of the business, and it hasn't been updated in a long time. It might not have been SAP, but I believe it was SAP. But it's like one of those things where you think like, man, I've touched like a lot of legacy code in my life. Like I couldn't imagine like touching legacy code that one is that old, two, like hundreds of millions of dollars of business is dependent on, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, there's a lot of code that, like, the amount of money that flows through it, if it doesn't work, it's disastrous.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I think the points you made about like it's always a part of you. Like a while ago I interviewed Kosuke Kawagachi, who was the founder of Jenkins, like the CI/CD tool, and he was talking about how even though he's not really involved in it anymore, like he still cares. And I think that's very fascinating because like these apps or this software these companies you build are they are organic things. Like even though it's all numbers and electrons and all of that, like you see them through the entire story. So you mentioned that company is still out there, right? Like how often do you like take a sit back and like, hey Brian, like, you know, Nintendo uses something that you decided was a good idea to start a business. Like how often do you actually like sit back and think of that? Or it's like it's just one of those things where it's just kind of there.
Yeah, I think you get to the point where it's just there.
Yeah.
Right? And eventually, like, the tools might disappear, and like people
Yeah,
might,
sure.
move to other things, or the industry evolves. But right now, like Nintendo still uses it, and Pokemon, and like all these very large game companies are still using this tool. And so every once in a while, I'm like, oh, they're still using it. That's cool.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a cool thing to go check in on. But I at this point I'm like, okay, I also have I have the
Yeah.
FusionAuth product, and we have a lot of big companies using that as
Yeah.
well. And I'm like, now I've kind of shifted my focus. I'm like, ooh, it's cool that these people are using FusionAuth now,
Yeah.
right? And so I think it's always kind of there. Like you kind of sometimes you get a little numb to it too, right? Because
Sure.
like with
Sure.
CleanSpeak, like we had so many big game companies using it. Like most of the big ones were using it, like King and Ubisoft and EA and et cetera, et cetera. And so you get another one, and you're like, oh, I'm surprised you're not already using this. Like
Yeah.
that was weird, So
Yeah.
you get a little jaded, but
Well, that's a good point, right? Like, and you don't need to get into the weeds of it, but like you get approached by some company, and one of two things I imagine happens. One, they have no content moderation at the time, and they need some immediately because of the scale of how big they are, and they're noticing like, oh, people have like no boundaries as to what they can do or say. Or the second approach, which I think is probably more common, they try to do it themselves, realize that they wrote something that just isn't going to work, and then they find you. Like, are those kind of like the two main different types of people that you would come across?
yeah. So that's the first one we call the like, oh crap, something just
Yeah,
happened sort of
yeah,
moment.
yeah.
Yeah. And so what we do is we like basically just give them an insurance policy, and we're like,
Oh, okay.
if this happens again in the future, Fusion or CleanSpeak will protect you, basically, right? So
Interesting.
we consider CleanSpeak like they're buying some insurance.
Yeah,
And then the other one is we built it internally. It's horrible. It's, we see all the holes in it, and this is like super critical to the business. So we want to put something in place that's better.
yeah,
And yes, it's still an insurance policy, but it's also a day-to-day operational thing, and they need it.
yeah. The liability piece, that's interesting. Like, because I think a lot of tech companies, they intentionally try to stay away from like the legal side of things because legal is very, very hard. Like, how do you get to a point where you recognize as a part of owning our product, we have a responsibility to our customers to ensure that our product works, and we'll do it so much to the effect that like we'll give you money if it doesn't. Because to effect that's kind of rare in the software space. Is like, yeah, support exists and all of that, but like usually the transaction flows or the money flows one way unless something awful happens.
Yeah, so we wouldn't, so just to clarify, we don't actually pay them money,
Oh,
right?
okay. Is
Oh
it
no,
like
it's not a true, we're not actually an insurance policy, but that's the way you can look at the
Oh,
business.
okay. Okay,
It's
that's
more
fair.
like
Okay.
insurance than it
I was about
is
to
like,
say,
yeah,
you're crazy if you're paying people like if something bad happens on their systems, right? Like that's crazy. But I mean,
yeah, you can't. I mean, there's no way that you could do that effectively,
yeah,
right? Because it's the natural language is very, very challenging. Like, I mean, AI is doing it based on what already exists.
sure.
But the second that I change something in my prompt with like put in a $ instead of an
Yeah.
S or an
Yeah.
O, it freaks out.
Sure.
It'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? That's what people can do with language, right? They can change the meanings of words by putting them next to other words, or they can like flip spellings and move letters around, and they can confuse computers very, very effectively.
Yeah.
And so with CleanSpeak, at least, we don't proclaim to like fix. It's not a
Sure.
solved
Sure.
problem. We're just like, hey, we're giving you a tool that's going to mitigate your risk in the future. But if something happens, it's that's not on
Yeah.
us. Like
Yeah.
that's on the person who did it. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I just, and sorry to dwell on this because it's fascinating to me because I have two young kids and I'm watching how language changes. Like my kids, the words that they come home and say, I'm like, I don't know what that word is. Like what? Like there's this whole generation of kids that are kind of saying these words that literally have no definition, right? And or in context they have tons of definition, but whatever. Like I imagine having to keep up with that sort of stuff is probably just it's a full-time job, like researching, okay, what language is being used these days, what is the current trends, how is language changing, and that's like the job of linguists, right? Like I mean, hopefully it's not the job of software people.
No, no, it's usually in that industry. It's like trust and safety, community managers, linguists to some degree, but like what you're really trying to do is just figure out is it bad or not?
Yeah.
Like, should it be allowed or should it not?
Yeah.
Right. And so like, yeah. Anyway, you could talk to companies for days on all the things that they have seen come up in their communities.
Yeah.
Had to like jump on that. You can't program a computer to find them.
Sure.
Kids were using the word cupcake at one point
Wow.
to mean something besides cupcake.
Sure.
And then it was only in that singular community. But kids had figured out, they're like, oh, the filter is shutting down this really offensive word, so we're going to use the word cupcake instead. And so the community manager saw that and then basically added cupcake to CleanSpeak for a week, and then they took it off, right?
Yeah.
So it was enough to like tell everybody like, hey, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, we know.
We found
we're
out.
watching you. Yeah, we're watching you. Yeah, I mean, never underestimate like the intelligence of somebody trying to get around something. Because we will like figure out or manipulate any system to do what we want. Obviously, so you said that company's still around, but you moved over to, different sort of idea that you had. You want to tell me a little bit? So that company's name is FusionAuth. Like, tell me a little bit about what FusionAuth does and like the value they provide, and then we can kind of get into like the history of it and all of that.
Sure. Yeah. So FusionAuth is a customer identity and access management tool. And that's just a fancy way of saying that we do login and all the things around login for like end users. And so end users meaning like you're logging in to order a pizza, or you're logging into an app that unlocks your car, or get your bank account, details like your statements and all those things. So those are the customers of our customers, essentially.
Sure.
And so it's either like B2C, B2B, B2B2B, to C, to B, to C, all the things, right? So like there's always like a tail of these things out, but it's the end users that we care about, the ones that are actually logging in to the tools. And so we took an entirely different approach, right? So like the market completely shifted. Everybody was throwing everything to the cloud. It was all multi-tenant. It was all SaaS. It's like just sign up for an account and call this API. And while that's fine, and it's good for some solutions, I kind of like to say, like, if you were to take your entire hard drive and upload it to S3 just so you could search your file system, like that's a bad use of those tools, right? So you just don't do it. Instead, what you do is you go, and you index your local file system, and then now you can like communicate with it. Yeah. Or only being able to call APIs through an online hosted version of Postman. Right? Yeah. Well, that doesn't work because it doesn't allow you to call local host, which is like your own machine.
Yep.
right? It can only call out because it's sitting on another server. So it doesn't work, right?
Sure.
So like, that's why tools like, Postman or curl and all these things, you download them and run them on your machine.
Yeah.
And so because we see ourselves as a developer tool, we are providing developers a way to like add these features to their application. We took the stance of like, well, let's make it look like a developer tool, right? It should look like MySQL. It should look like Linux. It should look like, Postman. It should look like whatever tool you use, your IDE, Xcode, code. Like you're downloading it and you're running it on your machine. So like, why wouldn't you do that with your login? Like to us, it just didn't make sense to like force you to do something in the cloud.
Yeah.
And so we built it specifically for that model, that approach.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So the origin was kind of, you saw the market kind of shifting over to, like you said, quite frankly, it's like, oh, we're going to be B2B or B2C auth, but it's all based in the cloud, and you're going to do this token handshake and all that. And you're just praying that whatever tools the SaaS provider gives you from a developer tools perspective just works. And if it doesn't work, YOLO, have a great time. Like, so, was this because you ran into a similar issue, like as you're working through something, or was this similarly like why are all these companies moving to this approach? Or like, how was like your original thought as to like, hey, this is a space that needs to get kind of reinvented?
So we were actually building another product. We were building a forum because we thought the forum would go very nicely with our profanity filter and moderation platform.
Sure.
And so we're like, let's build a forum. And so as we're building the forum, we're like, well, let's not hook in a login system, right? Because that's annoying. And everybody we work with, Disney, Pokemon, EA, Steam, like they all have their own login systems, right? And so if we're going to sell these game companies our forum, we should just automatically hook into their existing login. And so we basically built this little pluggable system where the forum could plug into basically any external login.
Sure.
Tool. Well, in order to test it, and we knew that there were companies that weren't going to have their own login tool.
Yep.
We were like, well, let's just build our own, testing login system, and we'll use that for testing. Right, so we built that as a separate tool first. And then we built the form. And then we started to be like, hey, this login thing is pretty cool. Let's go ahead and use it for our own website. Let's go ahead and hook it in this way, right? And so we started to use it ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, when the forum didn't take off, we were sort of left with this login system that we had built that was getting more and more feature rich because we wanted to use it ourselves. And so we kept adding to it and building on it. And so at the end of it, I'm like, hey, this login thing is awesome. Like, we should totally do this instead of the forum. And over a course of a couple of months, we kind of convinced everybody. There were only like 4 of us, but we're like, hey, let's switch, right?
Yeah.
And so we did. Switched everything over, started working on FusionAuth. And we really it took us a little while to figure out how to take it to market and how to actually make it what people wanted to use.
Sure.
But once we realized that if we made it a developer tool, easy to download, easy to install, really easy to integrate with, and we took that approach, it sort of took off, right?
Yeah.
And so once we launched that developer tool approach, within a couple of months, we had 2,000 or 3,000 downloads.
Yeah. That's amazing. When I think and I think this space is pretty fascinating because as an end user, I have some assumptions. It's funny. I'll go to a website, and if there isn't a Google, sign in with Google or sign in with what other tool, I immediately get annoyed. I'm like, you're going to store my username and password? That's dumb. Why are you doing that? So what are your thoughts on the third party identity providers? Do they bring value to the space? Is it, just another form of centralization? Because you're hyper dependent now on Google or Facebook or X or whatever. What are your thoughts in general about the third party approach to identity providing?
Yeah, so some folks just call that third party login, but the sort of industry or technical term for it is federated login.
Yeah.
So I'm federating, I'm sending you over there and then you come back over here, right? And then some people divide those into social and then others, right?
Sure.
And so Facebook, Google, those, for whatever reason, Google is kind of wrapped into the social side of things. But so those are very valuable, right? Again, reduce barriers to entry. It's just like a one click, you're logged in. Google's continue to try and make it easier and easier. So you might see like now, like you go to a site that's enabled by Google and it just pops up and it's like, hey, do you want to just log in to this brand new site that you've never been to? And you just click yes, and you're automatically logged in, right? And so they've made it easier and less cumbersome for people to create accounts and get into the tool, which is great for the businesses because now they don't have to worry about drop off during a sign up process. However, there's a bunch of issues that come with that. And one of them is what they call login fatigue, right? So it's like you go to a website and you can't remember of those 15 different buttons, like which one you clicked on. And if you click on the wrong one, are you creating a new account? And so that you get this fear, right? You're just like, oh my God, especially ones that are like log in with LinkedIn, Google, Facebook, Twitter, link, X, whatever, you list them out and you're just like, there's literally like 10 options and you're like, I can't remember. And I don't know what's going to happen if I click the wrong one. Right. And so that's an issue on like the user experience side and usability side. And so there's lots of things that people are trying to do to like combat that. So they're trying to reduce that set, but then once you reduce that set, now you're adding barriers to entry. Or they're trying to remove as many of those, but make the sign-up process still as simple as possible.
Sure.
Right. And so like you're getting some of the passkeys and those kind of things. And so it's still a huge issue in terms of usability, but it also is a nice way to just get access to things.
Yeah. It's like one of those, cliche with like great power comes great responsibility, right? It's like, I've done this before. Like I have a couple of different email accounts. Like I'll click sign in with Google and I'll click the wrong one. And I'm like, I've been here before. Why is it like sending me through like the new user registration section? Like this is not good. And then I have to get out. I have to like clear my cookies. I have to like try to like scrape that site of my presence and then try again and then whatever. Right. And I'm somebody who's somewhat technically savvy. So, imagine somebody trying to do that who's not, which is challenging. Another thing that you mentioned, and please correct me if I'm the summarization or assessment that I'm making is incorrect, but it's kind of like decentralizing authentication to an extent, right? Like you mentioned already at the beginning, like all of these different SaaS providers, or even like talked about like the federated stuff, where it's like you go here, you come back. It's becoming to the point where like we kind of are losing our identity a little bit. And, with that, there's challenges like, what if I don't want this company to have my information anymore? I got to go through some process to like get my data removed or whatever, right? Is how you're kind of approaching identity and authentication authorization, is it similar to like the idea of like decentralization that you're seeing a lot across different industries where people are kind of like, taking back ownership of some of their things?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So like we used to have this sort of proliferation of just like go somewhere else, do something, come back, right? Or like, I know I can get bits of data from all these different systems. And what we've seen is that a lot of people are sort of resourcing that and like saying like, no, I want to own your identity. And so we actually kind of pitch that to people. It's like, well, sure, you could send them over to Google, but once they come back, like you need to build an entire profile from them and just get as much of that data out as Google and into FusionAuth as you can, because now you become the source of truth and you're no longer just relying on Google to manage that identity and that user. And so you now have your own version of that, and you can, do analytics on them, and you can message them, and you can market to them and all those things. So yeah, we see a lot of people like bringing the identities back to their own databases and managing them themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty fascinating. Like I had a friend of mine, Rizal Scarlett, who works at Block, and we were talking a little bit about, that idea of like, wouldn't it be great if like companies had to go to you directly to get your information instead of you just kind of giving it to them and hoping they're being good actors with it, which let's be real, they're not. So like, what is your, what do you see like in the future, like ideal state for this space? Where, I mean, we're not going to carry around like little like RFID tags with our information on them and tap. Like that's wild, but maybe it exists at some point. Like, was that there's movies that have been like that. Like, what do you see as like a future goal state for this space where people want to own their own information? They don't want companies to, sell off information, keep it for their own good, But at the same time, like there is a bit of onus back on the end user, right? Of having to kind of manage all of that.
For sure. Yeah. So that's called self-sovereign.
Yeah.
Self-sovereign identity, which has been tried by tons and tons of companies over the last decade. And it just never worked, right? And the reason being is that you have both the chicken before the egg problem, which is like, well, which self-sovereign tool should I go sign up with to manage my self-sovereign identity? Because that's one that allows me to log into all the things I want to log into. Well, the things I want to log into aren't going to use a self-sovereign identity system until it's the most ubiquitous one. Yep. Right. And so you have this vicious loop of everyone's just waiting for each other to do it, and it's just never going to be solved. Plus, you have a lot of money invested into Meta and Facebook, X and Google and all these systems and Apple that have your identity, right? Yeah. And they're like, we're not going to work with those guys. No way. Yeah. No. We own the identity. Right. And so Google is like, no, you need to log in with Google, because then we can track where you're logging in.
Yeah, sure.
So every time you do a login with Google, they know it's you. They know you're logging into this tool on this date, and you're probably going to be doing these things. And so they add that to your profile, and now they can sell better ads. Right. And so if you look at the way that the money flows and you look at, self-sovereign identity, it's almost a dead on arrival. Like it's going to be so hard to rip that out until you have a governmental agency that says, I'm going to make self-sovereign identity the government identity.
Yeah.
And I'm going to regulate it in a way that does not allow Google to track your behavior by doing a Google login. And so we see that in some European countries, and we see some of these sort of national IDs starting to come about. And so that's what I think is the most likely scenario. But it's still not self-sovereign identity. You're not carrying around, again, like a thumb drive, like you said, and plugging it into things you want to log into. You're going to a government identity system, logging in there, and then they share your details, or you decide what the government shares with that provider, that vendor. So
yeah, I mean, now that you bring it up, I remember, I can't remember what it was, but I had to do something on some government agency website, and they had like their very own specific login, right? Login.gov or something like that. And I thought it was pretty fascinating because my immediate thought was like, oh, this is going to work like everywhere. Like every .gov website this is going to work on. No, it's not the case, because that's not how software works. But it is maybe in a move in a direction where it's like, okay, the government recognizes that there are certain information that you should have access to. And, if you want to a la carte say, okay, I want to give my email addresses or my phone numbers to this company, or if I want to give whatever to some other company, it should be my choice, right? And they all have to go back through one singular point. But I mean, at the end of the day, and let's just wrap this up like to the developer side. Like as a developer, that all sounds like a giant headache to me. Like, oh, I got to do this. Oh, but not in this case because they have to do this. Also, like this person might be coming from this country, so they got to do this. Like, I'd assume that something like EasyAuth would kind of, reduce that developer pain a little bit, right? Because it's just one platform, it's one thing. You want to talk a little bit about like how developers can take advantage of that?
Yeah, for sure. So like the second that you pick a tool like a FusionAuth or something like that, it doesn't matter like what other systems come online in the future, whether or not it's login.gov or whether or not it's some of the EU identities. You get those for free, essentially. And that's kind of a nice add-on to tools like FusionAuth, which is you just go in and you're like, yeah, I want to activate that and I want to turn it on. And so now you can make it the default, like only log in with this, right? So once you have the options to do that, then what you're doing is you're just integrating one time with FusionAuth, and you get all these added benefits in terms of new login systems that come about, or new login standards, or like passkeys and like all these things. So you don't have to use your brain space and your precious time to go figure this stuff out. You hand it off to a third-party vendor, right? And that's really the benefit of working with somebody when you're doing your login and your security. Yeah. Is just you implement a standard like OpenID Connect or OAuth or one of this well-known standards. Your application is talking a very heavily vetted, secure protocol, and then the person you're delegating to, like a FusionAuth, handles all the heavy lifting of integrating with all these other systems. So huge benefit.
Yeah. Because I just think we were talking about this a little bit before we got started. It's like, if I'm a developer, like I'm asked to like build some app and I build the app and then I'm like, oh shit, I need to log into it. Like, so I got to set up some little login thing and I got to figure out like, oh, do I actually want to hold this authentication information? And do I want to care about claims? Do I want to care about all this stuff? Or do I just use some, like you said, we talked about this a bit earlier, like SaaS provider. So like from a developer experience, like, is it literally, I think your website says like so easy you can download or something like that, right? Is it as simple as like you click, you integrate, you set up, and then it's done? Or is there a bit more, like, obviously there's tons of configuration for it, but like, what is like the first onboarding experience like?
Yeah, I mean, so it can be as simple as just downloading like one of our example apps or like an SDK, or using a third-party library, right? There's a ton of them in every language where it's like, okay, here's a language for Ruby that allows me to integrate with any OpenID Connect provider and add login to my app in a couple seconds, right? And so you stand up FusionAuth, you go through our configuration to make it OpenID Connect, compliant or enabled, and then you connect your app just using a third, like a library, an open source library. And there's a ton of those out there. So yeah, the integration is like once you understand like how login works through these standard protocols, then the integration is really simple.
So like, I'm curious as to when folks go to onboard it, like, I guess you probably have some telemetry as to like what people like. What is like one of the first things that people do like after they set it up? Do they like go to like the Google, Facebook, whatever, and click all those buttons? Like, typically, what's like the first thing that somebody does after they install it?
So we call it time to first login,
Sure.
which is essentially like I have an app, I need to get a login button, and I want to make sure it connects to FusionAuth, comes back from FusionAuth, and then they're logged into my app, right? And so we have a lot of documentation around like how do you even just do that process? And so that's usually what we see as most people as like their first steps.
Yeah. I mean, because I'm just thinking of like, all the different ways that I've had to kind of do this dance. And like you said, like depending on which one you decide to use, like if I'm not going to call out some of them, but if you use some of like the larger players in the auth space, it's like, okay, grab this SDK, do this thing, and then if it works, cool. If it doesn't work, here, go to our support forums or whatever, right? And I'm not to say that like, FusionAuth is like there's no bad paths. But like, what are some things that you typically see that people might not do the right way if they don't follow the documentation all the way through?
I would say the biggest hurdle that people have is like, how do I actually like manage my session or my cookies or tokens, right? So it's like that. I think that's the largest hurdle. It's like, okay, I'm going to go log in over there. I'm going to come back. I'm going to get some of these tokens, and then they're like, and now what do I do?
Then what? Yeah.
And like, how do I call my own APIs with these tokens, and what are the tokens for, and how do I validate the token? Like, that's where things like break down quite quickly, and you're just like, okay, now this is complicated again. I don't want it to be complicated, right?
Yeah, I remember I had to build something a long time ago that had some authentication built into it, and I used like a built-in library for a built-in thing, and this one person was always having issues, and I found out like after weeks of investigating that this person like only used the browser like in incognito mode. They literally never use like the regular mode. And I just would never ask that question, like, are you using incognito mode? Because that's wild to me. So like they were very accustomed to like logging into every site themselves, like every single time. And when they closed the browser, like they did it again. And I just remembered that, like, yeah, there are some people out there that like don't want their information like floating around inside of a browser, which I think is fair. Like, do you see like that a lot where it's like people are trying really hard to be cognizant of how much information of theirs is stored in the browser? Or do you think for the most part, people really just don't care? And like Google knows, Facebook knows, Twitter knows, like everybody just knows, right? So what's the point of like caring?
No, I think it's actually a really good thing for people to think about. Because what it comes down to the people that are building the application you're logging into, right? So almost zero of that sort of issue comes down to like what FusionAuth's doing.
Yeah.
But like once I'm logged into the app, what is that app pushing back that identifies me?
Yeah.
And if it's a token, can someone steal that token and then become me? Like, right? So like these are the security models that are like get pretty tricky.
Yeah.
And if they do it wrong, totally agree with that person who's like incognito mode is like the best way that I can defend and protect my own identity in a space where I don't control the code, right?
Yeah.
I don't work at, Foo Baz company that I'm logging into, and so I can't control how they're storing the tokens and how they're managing that, right?
Yeah.
And so from the FusionAuth perspective, we try to make that as simple as possible
Sure.
and as secure as possible, but we still can't, boil the ocean, right? We
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
solve world hunger, right?
yeah. Oh, sure. No, I mean, but it is a fascinating space solely because of the fact that, there's not very many experts in this space. Let's be clear. Like if you were to take like the entire pool of developers that exist, 20 million or whatever it is, probably more than that, and like you give them like a small subset of of the ones that actually know how authentication and authorization work, it's a very, very, very small subset, right? And I think I'm guilty of it as a developer. I think a lot of developers also are guilty of it. We're just like, just give me like the simplest thing, because like this company has already figured it out, so I'm just gonna trust them. And like, it's one of those things like in the world of tech, like we're so dependent on like trusting what somebody told us was a good idea. So like, I'm curious as to your point, like going forward, and we're in this world now where we're all online. Everybody's got like 5,000 different identities because every website has a different experience. Like, what is the future? And how do you think FusionAuth comes into play there?
Yeah, the crystal ball question.
Yeah, I mean,
That's always
look, you've been very
yeah.
successable with companies, so you probably have some good ideas. So I'm gonna steal them, and then I'm gonna do something else, right? Yeah.
Well, here's the kicker, right? So like a lot of the companies that I've built and the things that I've done are either standards based or they're really current. It's like, okay, I see that people are playing games and they're chatting and like Call of Duty and World of Warcraft and all these things. And I'm like, I think I can help fix that problem right now.
Sure.
Now, where's it going to go in the future? And like what AI is going to be there and like how we're going to have to like manage all these systems and those things. I think I have decent guesses, but the thing that I hate to do is guess, because I've done this in the past, go build a bunch of things and then be wrong and no one uses them. And so we've tried that both with FusionAuth and ClaimSpeak. And so we sort of like took an approach like, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't prognosticate too far in the future about like what's going to happen. But when our customers see things in their world that are starting to come over the horizon and starting to impact them, let's have a discussion. And if we see that a dozen times, well, then let's go build it, right? And so like I'm seeing like some AI things right now, and it's more of like, okay, I've logged into a system and now I'm asking a question of an AI bot and it's going to do things to my account automatically. How does it know it's my account, right? So there's these AI authentication pieces that are coming around. Well, those are just tokens. So now we just have to figure out how to get the AI the token and make sure they don't screw it up, right? And so I don't know necessarily that I have a sense for where things are going, because again, a year ago, I would have never guessed we'd be where we are with AI.
Sure.
But I can tell you that security is still bad. People are storing tokens, they're getting stolen, people's databases are getting hacked, login is busted, signups are really clunky and cumbersome. Vetting your customers and knowing that they're actually a human, not a bot, is really challenging. Making sure they are actually who they say they are, with like, government ID checks and things. Those are becoming more prevalent. And so I can see that the world is still in a, like a 10% case of like total overall security and doing things the right way. And we need to get to like the 7% case before we like build something new, right? We just need to secure the things that we already have. And like, it's dramatically hard when you have systems, like US government systems that are 30 years old and they don't update them, or systems, like old school, like systems like even Amazon. Amazon's login hasn't fundamentally changed in like 2 decades.
Sure.
And it's just like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? Well, maybe not 15 years, we'll call it.
Sure.
But like, wow, right? And so like, we just need to get those systems improved first.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about like, okay, what's next? You know?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's definitely, I think in tech specifically, we all fail to realize that if the foundation isn't solid, like the house ain't gonna work. So like we go down this path of like, what's next? And then we realize, oh, like we probably should have done something differently like 2 years ago, but we're here now. So let's just figure it out. I mean, there's something to that. I think there's some value in wanting to move fast and all of that. But at the same time, all you're doing is setting a future Brian and Isaac up for a disaster, right? Which, a lot, we don't really think about the future too much unless we're thinking about new ways to build things. We don't think about like having to solve problems in the future. This conversation's been great, Brian. Like, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. Like I mentioned at the beginning, like, this space, like this auth space is fascinating to me just because of, in my opinion, like how, from a developer's perspective, how it can be kind of challenging and confusing. And I'm glad to hear that like you're thinking of some of the different ways to really solve this problem and bring, developers more down this happy path. And for folks that are curious about FusionAuth and they want to see some of the stuff that Brian and team are doing, like you can, there'll be a link to the FusionAuth site down at the bottom of this page. Brian is on Twitter X, so you can find him at BPONTARELLI. That's B Pontarelli. And those will be some other links to find him if you want to follow along and see what he's doing. So before we sign off, my friend, do you have any parting words?
No, this has been great. Thanks for having me on the show. The only other thing I'll kind of just drop because we're starting to do some announcements about it is that for any Java folks out there that are in the Java ecospace, we just released our own HTTP server. Java's been lacking one. If anybody in the Java space knows, like Tomcat has been there, and there's a lot of old clunky systems. But we just released our own HTTP server. It's super lightweight. It's like under 100K, I think, and it's one of the fastest ones out there. So check it out. It's just Java-HTTP. It's under the FusionAuth GitHub, and we're always looking for people to like help on that project.
Awesome.
And it's open source.
Yeah, I mean, open source is great. Glad to see that you folks are trying to get stuff out there and get feedback. So that's awesome. And again, I super appreciate your time to chat with me about these things. To a lesser known individual, talking to an expert is always great. And thank you folks for tuning in live that were watching this, and thanks for the folks that are listening in the future. So my name is Isaac Levin. This has been Coffee and Open Source, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. For my friend Brian, take care.